Hi guys, and welcome to Chapter 7. For Chapter 7, we'll be going over soils as well as agriculture and food security, and today we're going to kick things off with an introduction to food security in a nutshell. So, let's check it out. Before we can get into a useful definition of what food security is, first it would be good to get a robust definition for what food actually is, because many of us might not have a definition on hand for what food is. We know what it is, but how to define it can be a little bit more tricky. Basically put, food is any edible substance that provides two things. First is energy for daily metabolic activities, energy for us to go run outside, talk, think, perform work, anything of that nature. In addition, food provides the raw materials for our bodies to grow, repair, and maintain itself. Now that we have an idea of what food actually is, we can then look at rates of food production as well as food security. Now, currently, food production is outpacing human population growth, and historically this has always been the case. And again, this is through a number of different factors, such as the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, the industrial revolution in the 1880s, and something called the green revolution that we're going to dive into in detail here in a few slides. Now, because of these different revolutions in food technology and technology surrounding food, such as resource extraction capabilities and the ability to synthesize fertilizers such as phosphorus and nitrogen, food production has always outpaced population growth. What that means is that the rate in which we are gaining food is outpacing how fast we are adding additional people to our global populations. Now, this is the case right now, and it always has been historically. However, by 2050, we will need to have enough food to feed 9 billion people, more than we have ever had in the entire history of the planet. Not only is feeding 9 billion people a huge challenge in itself, it is more people than we have ever had to feed on our planet in the history of mankind, but it also comes with a whole nother host of problems. Problems such as climate change, which are going to render some areas of food production completely unusable and open others up that were previously unusable to expansion in agriculture. So in addition to feeding more people than we've ever had to feed before, we are also trying to do that under very changing conditions. And this is what brings us to the issue of food security that we need to talk about today in class. So again, this brings us to the issue of food security, and food security is simply defined as the guaranteed availability of adequate, safe, and nutritious food for all people at all times. Now, this is taken for granted in first world countries, countries on the bottom right-hand side of your screen that are in green. However, for developing countries and third world countries, food security isn't always a guarantee. And that leads us to a series of very challenging problems that are associated with not having adequate and nutritious food on a regular basis. Now, after declining for 4 decades, the number and percentage of hungry people increased from 2008 to 2009. So there was a huge spike right after the economic crisis of 2008. And this was largely due to higher food prices after that economic slump. However, we've done a pretty good job of fighting food insecurity globally over the past half century or so. The number of undernourished people, the number of people who don't have enough food to eat, did decrease back down to more normal levels in 2010. And so while the total number of people on the planet who are going hungry has been steadily increasing, the percentage of people relative to the global population that are going hungry has been steadily declining for the last half decade or so. And this is because even though more and more people each year are not getting enough access to food, relative to how many people globally that we have on the planet, that number is actually going down. So as a percentage of the population, we are getting better and better at providing food security. And that's what you need to know when you take a look at the graph on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. On the red, you have an increased number of people going hungry each year. However, as a percentage of the population, that number has been steadily going down. So now that we have defined food, food security, and some of the trends associated with food production, population growth, as well as trends in food security over the last half decade, now we can get into some of the issues associated with being food insecure. That means not having enough access to energetically dense, nutritious food on a regular basis. The first term I want you to know whenever you think of food insecurity or issues associated with not having enough reliable food is going to be undernutrition. Undernutrition is simply receiving fewer calories than the minimum daily energy requirement. This is a problem with the amount of food, the quantity of food that a person gets each day. Sustained undernutrition leads to starvation, basically death, by not having enough energy to keep your body maintaining its basic metabolic functions and enough energy to go along with your daily day-to-day activities. Now, 925 million people each year do not have enough food to eat, and what this translates into, unfortunately, is that every 5 seconds a child starves to death. And you can see that the preponderance of countries and populations that have huge issues with undernutrition are going to be in Central Africa. The next term I want you guys to be familiar with is something called malnutrition. Malnutrition is a shortage of nutrients in the body. Undernutrition referred to energy, malnutrition refers to nutrients. And basically it's a shortage of the nutrients that the body requires for basic functioning, such as the building and maintenance of things like proteins, vitamins, and minerals that your body needs to survive and function. This is not a problem with the quantity of food. This is a problem with the quality of the food that you are getting. And it basically means that your body is not receiving enough raw materials that it needs to keep itself alive. Now, there are several issues associated with being malnourished. The first is something called kwashiorkor. Kwashiorkor is a nasty condition that occurs when the diet lacks proteins and essential amino acids. These are going to be the building blocks that your body needs to grow and repair itself. Proteins are fundamental for a number of our body's metabolic functions. And this is really common when children in impoverished and very food insecure countries stop breastfeeding, so they stop getting a number of different nutrients that is provided in their mother's breast milk. Now, conditions associated with kwashiorkor include a bloated stomach and enlarged liver, basically different types of mental and physical abnormalities and disabilities, and it can be a really nasty condition. In addition, there is another condition known as marasmus. Marasmus is due to protein deficiency and insufficient calories. So where kwashiorkor was only going to be resulting directly from not having enough nutrients, specifically not getting the number of proteins and amino acids that you need, marasmus is going to be a disability or a condition associated with not getting enough nutrients and not getting enough calories. So marasmus is going to be a result of both undernutrition and malnutrition, whereas kwashiorkor was only a direct result of malnutrition. Marasmus is basically going to be a wasting of the body. It's characterized by extreme loss of body fat, having a very low body mass index, very low muscle tissue, and a host of different organ abnormalities and dysfunctions. Both of these are going to be really nasty conditions that no child and no parent should be subjected to. However, they are quite prevalent in areas of the world that are very food insecure, and this is why food security becomes such a big deal. Now, in developed countries, we actually have the opposite problem. We have issues with overnutrition, and overnutrition is basically receiving more calories than actually required. This is going to be things that lead to weight gain, obesity, and some of the major problems that we see in the United States, Europe, and some of the other developed countries around the world. Overnutrition also leads to a host of serious health problems, things like cardiovascular disease if you get too many fats in your diet and too high of cholesterol, diabetes if you just simply have too much body weight, and other health problems. And in the US, 3 out of 5 people are overweight and 1 in 4 are actually obese. And worldwide, over 500 million people are obese, most of which are going to be in developed countries. Again, just because we're not starving doesn't mean these conditions don't have a whole host of other problems. There are also serious problems associated with overnutrition that can adversely affect our health. And now that we've discussed some of these specific instances, examples, and conditions associated with a lack of food security, we're going to talk a little bit about fighting food insecurity globally and something called the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was a revolution in agriculture around the 1940s that introduced a variety of new technologies, crop cultivars or crop strains, and farming practices to the developing world, so those third world and impoverished countries, that drastically increased food production globally. This was led by a biologist by the name of Norman Borlaug, and what he did was he bred specific cultivars, meaning specific strains or types of different types of grains, such as wheat or rice, which were then going to be drought and disease resistant and produced a higher crop yield. So basically he took the crops that we already had, made them tougher to survive a range of different environmental conditions and disease, and then brought those to developing nations. And as a result of doing this, he is credited with saving more lives than anyone in human history. This helped millions of people avoid starvation in different countries around the world. And specific examples in your book are going to be examples such as Mexico, India, and Pakistan, which dramatically reduced starvation and famine in these countries, specifically because of Norman Borlaug and his crop cultivars associated with the Green Revolution. Now, that is everything I have for you guys today for an introduction into food security. Next, we will be getting into agriculture. I'll see you guys then.